So today we have the new Poseidon Drop Bar X Ambition. It just came in, so I'm gonna get this thing out of the box and put it together. This is the first time I've ever bought a bicycle new, and it's the first time I've ever put one together. So fingers crossed that that goes okay. And then after that, we're gonna go take it for a little test ride. All right, so I finally got this thing put together. All in all, it wasn't that bad. There isn't a whole lot to it, and really there isn't too much assembly required. And like I said, I've never put together a bike or anything, and I don't consider myself like overly handy or anything. And I didn't have any real issues, just a couple little spots that took me a little bit longer than maybe someone who's really good at this. So a few things to keep in mind if you're planning on doing this yourself. Number one, like I said, I think it's totally doable. Obviously, it depends on your comfort level and what you're comfortable with doing, but it's a pretty simple machine. There's not a whole lot to it, so you can absolutely do it. It doesn't require a whole lot. The second thing is that there are no physical or digital instructions or like a user manual or anything like that. There is a video that goes over the assembly of the different bikes. However, there wasn't one specifically for the Ambition because I'm guessing it's newer. And also it wasn't a video like directly from Poseidon. It was a dude with his own YouTube channel, which is fine, and I'm sure there's some affiliation there, but it's something to keep in mind. So like I said, I only ended up running into a couple different spots where it ended up taking me a little bit longer than what it probably should have. The first one was the chain and the derailleur installment. For some reason, I just could not get the chain untangled for the life of me. It took forever. I was doing all this mental like geometry and stuff in my head, trying to figure out which way it needed to go. I was watching videos, doing all kinds of stuff. And finally, I just luckily moved the chain in the right way and it started to make sense and I was able to get it done. But that definitely took me way longer than it probably should have. And so if you have one of those like quick link disconnectors where you can actually take the chain apart, I think it'd be way easier, but I didn't have that and I didn't really want to mess with it. The second thing with this installation that ended up eating up a bunch of time was getting the brakes dialed in right. So I did pay the extra $270 or whatever it is for the upgraded hydraulic brakes, although I don't think it'll matter if you pay for the upgraded version or not. But the area I was running into issues with is that the pads on the front and the back were rubbing against the rotors. So on the backside, it was a relatively easy fix. I was able to loosen up the calipers and move it around and get it to where it needed to be so it wasn't rubbing anymore. But on the front end, I was really struggling. It took me a long time to get to the point where the brakes weren't rubbing on the rotors anymore. And so if you're running into the same issue, one hack I stumbled upon when I was YouTubing this is to loosen up the housing bolts on the caliper assembly itself. And then you're going to squeeze that brake down and hold on to it. And this should center the caliper assembly again. And then you'll tighten back down those housing bolts while you're still holding onto the brake. And that shored things up pretty well for me. So like I said, all in all, the assembly wasn't too bad. It's definitely doable, even if you've never done it before. I really like the look of the bike, especially this color scheme, this like forest green with the orange accents and then all the matte black. So far, so good. I'm excited to get this thing out on a test ride tomorrow morning, and we'll see how that goes. All right, so I just finished up my first ride on the Poseidon X Ambition, did a little over 50 miles, and I'd say about half of that was on gravel, so I got a pretty good idea of how the bike handles and what I like and what I don't like. So let's go through all the pros and cons now. So starting with the pros, the first and probably the most obvious is going to be the price. Let's be honest, bikes are ridiculously expensive, and finding anything under $1,000 is near impossible. And that's where I feel that Poseidon is really feeling a need right now, especially for people like me who aren't really sold on the idea of biking yet and are looking for an entry-level but quality-level way to get into it. You just cannot beat the price. With the hydraulic brake upgrade, I was right around $1,000, and it seems like they're always running this $100 off coupon on all their main flagship bikes. So if you didn't want to do the brake upgrade, you could absolutely get into this bike for under $1,000. And last week was Black Friday, and I noticed some of their sales, and they had even more discounts. So the price here is just hard to beat if you're wanting to buy new and not used. The second pro is going to be the shifting set. This has the Microshift Advent, which is supposed to be a budget set. However, on this first ride, at least, I was doing a ton of up and down shifting, and I thought it worked great. It felt pretty smooth, and I honestly have no complaints there at all. The next is going to be mounting options on the bike itself. Plenty of attachment points if you ever want to take this thing bike camping, and if nothing else, you can get creative with where you want to put your water bottles and whatever gear you have with you that you're bringing with you for the day. And the last pro is just the overall feel and rideability and capability of the bike. Like I said, I put in about 50 miles on this first day with a decent amount of climbing in there. About half of those miles were on paved roads, but the other half were spent on gravel roads. And we even got into some easier single track mountain biking trails. And honestly, I felt great. It felt very fast and capable on the paved roads. I could definitely tell a difference from the road bike I had previously. However, it still felt great, and I didn't feel like I was being bogged down or slowed down by the tires or the weight of the bike or anything like that. On the gravel roads, this thing ripped. A lot of the gravel riding was downhill, so we were able to really push the pace on it and have some fun there. And this bike was super confidence inspiring. I felt like I could take the turns hard, felt like it handled great straight through all the loose gravel and everything, so no complaints there. And then on the mountain bike trails, I felt relatively good there as well. There were some spots where I did end up getting off the bike and walking it through certain pieces of terrain. However, part of that could be my lack of exposure to mountain biking and just not being super comfortable there, because I think the bike would handle it no problem, especially with the tires aired down a bit. So I really tested this bike in about every domain, the on-road, the gravel road, and the mountain biking trails. And it did feel like a do-it-all bike, and I felt like I could go from one to the other and not really skip a beat. So there's all the pros. However, this is not a perfect bike, and there are some cons and there are some big ones. The first of which being the brakes. If you've done any kind of research on these bikes, I'm sure you've come across people complaining about how bad the brakes are. And let me tell you, the brakes are that bad. Even with the upgraded hydraulic brakes, after I did the bedding process when I first got the bike assembled, the brakes felt so awful and so soft and so weak that I ended up doing the compressionless brake housing upgrade. And after I did that, the brakes are great. I can lock up both tires if I want to. They've got plenty of grab, and I can't bring the brake handles all the way back to the bars like I could before. So if you're planning on getting this bike, I go ahead and plan on doing the compressionless brake housing upgrade, because in my opinion, the bike is borderline unrideable with the normal brakes. I just bought the Jaguar kit off Amazon that everyone else has done videos on this has used. It is a super simple process, and I think it costs somewhere around like $50 or something like that. So it is well worth the money in my opinion, especially when it comes to your brakes. I think that's an area that you probably don't want to skimp out on. Number two, and this is going back to the assembly process, is that they don't have an actual like instruction manual. They have the videos online and those are fine and everything. However, I feel like it would have been really helpful to have like an actual instruction manual just to look through that. For me at least, it would have been helpful. And especially because I did have the hydraulic brake upgrade, and like I said, I'm not super familiar with bikes. I'm kind of new to this cycling world. When it came to adjusting the brakes so that they weren't rubbing on the rotors, the video only discussed the normal mechanical brakes that come on the bike stock. And so I ended up making a boneheaded mistake, and I ended up unscrewing something I shouldn't have on the brake assembly, which ended up leaking some of the mineral oil, which meant that I had to go buy a bleeding kit to bleed both the brakes and get them set up again. I admit that this was probably more ignorance on my end than it is their fault, but it would have been nice to have some instruction along the way, especially for those of us who've never put a bike together. Like I said before, it's not a difficult process, and as long as you have clear instructions on what to do, the actual mechanical aspect of it is very easy. So Poseidon, just send some freaking paper instructions with the bikes. Next up is going to be the saddle and the pedals. I don't feel like either of these are terrible out of the box, and it's nice that it actually comes with pedals out of the box because a lot of bikes don't. However, the pedals are plastic, and I feel like most people could probably benefit from an upgrade there. And the saddle is okay, and I realize that this is largely a personal preference, but personally I feel like there's definitely some room for improvement there, and it's going to be one of the first areas I probably end up upgrading. And then lastly, and this is going to be super specific, and I don't know if anyone else who has done this compressionless brake housing upgrade has experienced this, but on the front post there's a super cool orange Poseidon decal, and it's right where the brake cables run through. And because that compressionless housing is so stiff and doesn't have a lot of pliability to it, after that first 50-mile ride, the paint on that decal is starting to rub off. And I realize this isn't that big of a deal, it's purely aesthetic, but it really sucks to have a brand new bike with less than 100 miles on it and the paint's already starting to rub off in a spot. Maybe that problem could be avoided, I don't know. Okay, so overall, I am very happy with my decision to end up purchasing this bike. I was between this one and a few of the other big name brands as far as entry-level gravel bikes, and I feel like this one really just checks all the boxes for me. It truly seems like a do-it-all bike, which I really like the idea of. I can take it out on the road and keep up, and then I can hop on gravel or even single track mountain biking trails and still be able to hold my own. If you're looking for a budget-friendly do-it-all gravel bike, I think that the Poseidon X Ambition is a great choice. I'm planning on doing some bigger trips on the bike once the weather starts getting nice again. I plan on doing some bike packing, and I'll be sure to share all of that with you guys and give you an update down the road after I've got some more miles on this thing. Hopefully this helps you one way or another if you've already bought it or if you plan on buying one. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to help, and we'll see you next time.